Hello and welcome to episode 6 of my podcast, An Interview with an Architect. And this week I'm very pleased to welcome Lydia Robinson, who is a creative director of Design Story, who are based in Oxfordshire. Lydia, I welcome you to this episode. And if I can ask you please to introduce yourself to the viewers and let us know a bit about yourself, your history as an architect and how you've come up through the ranks, and then some more about the practice, please.
Yeah, so nice to see everybody. As Nick mentioned, I am the creative director of Design Story. We're a small architecture practice based in Oxford. We specialise in listed buildings and kind of conservation work, as well as some new builds that are on sort of tricky sites in the Cotswolds and in Oxford. When I started back in architecture, it's quite a long time ago now. In fact, I started architecture school when the first episode of Grand Design was aired in 1998, which is really interesting because that was a changing point in architecture, I think, because at that time, architects were very mysterious. People didn't understand what architects did. And then Grand Designs came on TV, and suddenly everybody was like, oh, architecture is interesting. But I'd always wanted to be an architect.
Yes.
My grandfather was an architect, and my father's a civil engineer. So it was something that was always in my sort of family, and I kind of knew about it. So I had access to it, where I think other people of my generation potentially didn't know about it until Grand Designs. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then I've worked, I studied at Edinburgh University, which is great. Loved Edinburgh, very exciting place to study architecture, very dynamic, small city, quite up and down everywhere, which is quite interesting for an architect. Yeah, and then I met my co-director there, Lawrence. We studied together. We actually did our dissertation project together at university. When we finished it's a bit crazy, isn't it? Doing it with your other half and then having a practice together. But we left university and we moved to Vancouver in Canada, which is a bit interesting.
Okay.
We were supposed to be sort of a year working holiday, but we ended up staying 7 years, and we both worked in practice in Vancouver. Then we moved back to the UK. I worked in commercial practice for a while and founded Design Story with Lawrence. And then we were able to... The first project we did actually was our own house near Bristol, and it won a REBA award. It won 2 REBA awards, a conservation award and a regional award, and we were able to launch the practice based on that project. So it's quite interesting.
Okay, wow, that's really good. And so the you mentioned Vancouver. Your first project was the REBA awarded your own home. So when did Design Story? When did that start? When did you start the practice? Sorry.
So we formed the practice around 2013, but we formed as a development company originally for this project. So this project was a cottage. It was sort of a house that used to be 2 cottages, but had been made into a full house. We decided to split it back to 2 cottages and sell them, keep one and sell the other. So it was like a little development. So originally we thought we'd be a development company, but we realised that actually it's quite hard to be an architect and a developer. We enjoyed the architecture more than potentially the development, so we ended up using that project as our portfolio project. And then we did one other development, and then we started just doing architectural services. So that was in around 2016. We sort of started to become a proper sort of architecture practice.
Okay. And we mentioned earlier you are based in Oxford. So how's the business set up now then? How the number of staff and projects you're involved in? Is it you mentioned residential with your own cottage you've developed and what have you? Is it all residential work you're involved in, or what's the projects on the table?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. We have a good mixture because the office is based in Oxford. A lot of our projects are also Cotswolds, houses in the Cotswolds. So we have access to quite a lot of different types of buildings and structures. So we're doing a few projects in Oxford itself. A restaurant, for example, interior design of a restaurant in Oxford, which is quite a nice project, which is in a building owned by the college, one of the colleges. And then we've got a lot of private residential, a couple of new build houses on quite tricky sloped sites in the Cotswolds next to listed buildings, where you have to be quite sort of clever about the design, and our heritage expertise is good for that. And then we've got a couple of interior design projects because we specialise also in interior design. So we try to do a holistic design on the residential, where we do look at the landscape, the interiors and the architecture, not just the architecture. So we just started picking up a few projects where we're just the interior designer, not the architect, which is quite interesting. There's a different perspective, collaborating with another architect. It's sort of fun challenge. So yeah, quite a mixture. In a museum, the most quirky one is probably an extension to a museum in the Cotswolds. So
oh wow, okay. So
do
you plan to bring interior designers into the business as well, or is that something you'll always subcontract out, do you think?
No, I think I'm registered as an interior designer and an architect, and we have a member of our team, Frida. She's also registered as an interior designer, although she has an architectural background. So we're trying to encourage. There's 6 of us in the team at the moment, and we're trying to encourage everybody to have specialisation. So it's almost like the architecture is the baseline, your technical kind of knowledge that brings it all together, and then you can have something else in the background that's your kind of specialist sort of passion. So for me, it is the heritage and a bit of the interior design. For Frida, I think it's more the interior design. And then we've got another member of staff, Lubov, who's very interested in like technical kind of issues, and I could see her maybe looking at being a passive house designer. So we want to encourage everybody on the team to champion something that's a bit more specialist.
Yeah. Well, that as well as a business, I've been working with practice directors for 30 years now, pretty much. And the model that you are trying to create there is textbook. It's really very good because you are able to, it makes you attractive to any potential new staff as you look to grow in the future. And everybody has their own place within your business. It's a really good way, from what I see, to kind of grow your business moving forward. So, good on you with that. That sounds like a really good plan. Where do you see yourself? Obviously, now you've recently moved into Oxford, I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the last sort of year or so, we moved to Oxford from Cheltenham. Where do we see ourselves in the future? I'd like to be still a small practice, like 8 to 10 people would be ideal. A little bit bigger than we are now, but still that we can sort of feel like we're a small team and we're close. And like you've said, we've all got specialisations, but we're all sort of directly involved with the project, so it's not so big that we lose touch of what's going on. I think that just keeps it nice for the clients. It has more of a family atmosphere rather than a corporate atmosphere, I'd say, because we're working on domestic projects. And even our office, actually, when we designed the office, it's in an existing building that used to be a house, but we painted it to make it feel like a home, because we feel like the office is a sort of home, because we work on homes. So it's a reflection of our passion for like domestic architecture, I think. So
absolutely, yeah. So with your staff members at the moment, then, so some practices are still, lots are now going back to working 5 days a week in the office, or some are still perhaps carrying on from the fallout from COVID and having kind of hybrid remote working. Where are you guys at the moment? Are you all 5 days in the office, or how do you work?
We work a 9-day fortnight, actually, which is that we take one day on Friday. And that's to help the team kind of have some more free time for themselves. It helps the directors catch up with that. So that's the sort of model we've been working. And then we're studio-based outside of that. And that's because we're such a small team that we've looked at doing things like core hours and all sorts of other hybrid kind of people coming in and people coming out, but we just feel like it's very hard to keep in touch, and it's very hard also for us to work with the external consultants. So we are very much about studio, like all hands to the deck. We've got a big sample library just behind me because we're doing a lot of interior designs. We like to have all of that when we're designing in the office. We have pin-up boards on the wall. So it's kind of a traditional model in that sense, that we're still sketching, pinning things up, looking at some samples. It's not.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's
hands-on.
It's clearly working well, and I'm interested in the 9-day fortnight because you hear an awful lot about that now, and practices are talking about it. Not so many have done it. Has that been received well by your colleagues, your staff members? Has it gone down well?
Yeah, it's gone down really well, and it's kind of quite easy for us as a small practice to sort of understand and administer, because obviously when you're a small practice you don't want to do something that's quite hard to calculate, and that's what we were looking at core hours, and it was like, how are we going to figure out who's coming in where, and it's going to be very difficult. Whereas the 9-day fortnight, because we're all on the same pattern, so we all know we've got that day off in our calendars ahead of time, and everybody then can get that long weekend. We've had people going away and all sorts of things, and occasionally it means that obviously the deadline day is often on a Friday, and that's our day off, so the deadline will be on the Thursday. But actually it's quite nice because you push for the deadline on the Thursday, knowing that you've kind of got 3 days to kind of recover. So the idea is
nice.
so that's a nice bonus. I mean, the idea is that we don't do less hours. We're still, we're still doing the same kind of project deadlines. We're still meeting
Yes.
the same deadlines. We're just compacting them into a shorter week every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And then obviously lots of others that I'm talking to as well. It's difficult nowadays. It seems to be, the part one coming up through the ranks and all the rest of it. There's everyone vying for the same job and what have you. How do you see the industry at the moment? And for those that are trying to come into the world of architecture, that have just gone through their part one, would you eventually, as you look to grow the team, would you welcome the junior architect to come up through the ranks? How do you kind of see that?
Yes, I think it's always really important to try and get young staff and junior people and train them up. And I had that when I was doing my part one. But I think the issue at the moment is that it's getting harder. There's a bigger disconnect between university and practice, and I think there needs to be something done to help junior people transition more easily. Because the problem with being a small practice is that it's a big resource to train somebody for us. It's like a quarter of our workforce, and so it would be more helpful, I think, if some of them came out of the education system with a few more sort of grassroots kind of ideas about what architecture is, because I think they're still quite inexperienced. And I think that's where the apprenticeship and some of these other sort of more hybrid models will actually be beneficial, because people won't get such a shock, I think, about education, about the workplace.
That's what I was going to say. I think the apprenticeship route is really very good. I was talking to somebody last week or so about it. I think that certainly with the costs involved going through university and everything as well, I think the apprenticeship route, if that can be pushed and is something that becomes quite matter of fact, I think that's a really good way to go.
I think that's right. I think because it's just, architecture is such a practical, physical profession, especially at domestic level, that you go to a building site and you see but quite basic builder kind of constructing from your drawings, and the first time you ever see that, it's kind of an epiphany moment where all those lines that on the drawings weren't lines, they're blocks, and the guys has to lift them and put them on. It's quite sort of basic, and you sort of, your head kind of your whole space of architecture changes when you go on site, I think, and you realise and you make much more of a connection to it being a thing, and just a picture on a piece of paper. And I think it takes quite a lot of time to get that. That's why I think the apprenticeship will help people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Earlier, and then it means that their design will be better quicker, because they'll know what they're drawing. They won't be suspending this. They won't be in this sort of drawing era too long, and they'll be more realising, actually, I'm making a building now. So I think
I'd like to think as well that the apprenticeship route may attract more youngsters into the industry as well. I think it will.
I think it'll attract
because
people
of all the things that you've already alluded to.
I think that's right. I think it might make it not feel like it's so academic. So I think some people will be put off by architecture because they feel like it's a very long degree, it's very expensive, all the things you've touched on. But I think that they might come on site and say, well, actually, there is a role for me in architecture, but it isn't. I was overwhelmed by it when I saw it as a sort of degree program. But when you see it on site, and a practical person actually might be able to pick up the technical drawing and have a really good role in architecture that perhaps they wouldn't have thought they could.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's changing the perception of it, I think, to make it more accessible and not so academic. I think there's still a role for academic architects and academia in architecture, but I think there's different streams and different places for everybody.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. I spoke fairly recently to the Chartered Institute of Technologists. People up through to become technicians, technologists, and that route as well. Something that's not necessarily historically been as well advertised and promoted as perhaps it should do. And nowadays, I think, as you mentioned there, the whole world of architecture and everything it encompasses, that's something that's, I'm hoping to raise a profile of. And, having meetings like this certainly does that as well, because there is more to the world of architecture than people perhaps necessarily think. To certainly youngsters as well. My daughter is 15, and for her, she pretty well have no idea. They don't really discuss it at senior school level. It's only later down the line, isn't it? I think the more these things are talked about, the more exposure it gets.
I think that's right, because it's one of those professions that you'd have to come into contact with somebody in it to think that you would do it, and you'd have to know enough about it to be curious, to feel like you have the skill set to do it. So I think exposure.
Absolutely, yeah.
what the job is is a really good way of getting the youngsters interested, and not just making it one of those old school professions like a lawyer. It sits with lawyer, doctor, vet, so everybody sort of understands what a lawyer, doctor, vet do. And then kind of architects, the sort of esoteric one, where everybody's like, I don't know, are they like engineers? I don't know if I like that. It's got that kind of, so I think you're right.